So I grew up in Michigan. This time of year, it's very cold. It's very snowy. And so I'm very happy to be down here now in San Diego with my wife. We've been here for a few years. But growing up, we used to go to this place every year, maybe even a couple times a year. I'd either go on a school trip or I would go with a group of friends or with a church group. We would go to this place called Cedar Point. Anybody ever heard of Cedar Point? Yes. Yes, Cedar Point is an amusement park. It's a roller coaster park, and that is their main focus. Their main focus is every year they try to outdo themselves by building another bigger, faster, crazier roller coaster. So we would go every year, and it was a lot of fun, and we really enjoyed it. Well, we enjoyed not just the roller coasters themselves, but every time we would go, there was this treat that was available that wasn't available anywhere else, and they're called Dippin' Dots, the ice cream of the future, baby, okay? So those were, they seem to be readily available now, like you can get them in gas stations and stuff, but at the time, you had to go to Cedar Point to get the Dippin' Dots, and so that was always something to look forward to. So that was an amusement park we would go to, just have a lot of fun, have a blast, and then, coming out here, you learn about, even growing up out there, you would hear stories about the most wonderful, magical place on earth, Disneyland, right? Disney. Any Disney fans in the house? Anybody here? It's like everybody. It is known as just this magical place, right? You can go there, kind of get caught up in the wonderment of everything that's happening, and you can pretend like you're in Star Wars, you're on Tatooine as a Jedi for a day if you want to. You can just kind of get lost in the world of Disneyland. Now, the truth of that is nothing wrong with that. It's great, it's fun, but eventually, what happens? You got to leave the happiest place on earth, and you got to go back to facing the realities of life. And that's a big part of what we want to talk about today, is we're talking about this concept of the realities that we face every day or every year or as long as we're on this human existence. And one thing that we want to talk about through the next couple weeks is this idea of grief. So I'll be sharing the message today. Like I said, my wife, Hosanna, she'll be up here over in the sanctuary next week, and she'll be sharing part 2 of this. You'll hear a bit of her story as well. Grief is a universal emotion, and it looks different in all of our lives, but we can't escape grief. The grief felt from the loss of a loved one, the death of a dream, the end of a relationship, or countless other ways we encounter hurt and loss. These are just the realities of life. And it's not an easy thing to talk about, but I think it's important for us to take some time today and look to see what the biblical truths are about how to grieve and how to grieve in a healthy way. So we're just going to take some time here in this conversation where I'm going to unpack some biblical truths as we start to process this. But here's one thing that I know, and this is something that Jesus said to his disciples one day. He said this in the book of John. He says, "In this world, you will have trouble." That's a universal concept. Every one of us at some point will face troubles. Jesus is warning his disciples at the time, but is also warning us now here in 2022 that we will face trouble. Now, I'm not talking about, my Wi-Fi isn't working. Like that's, there is that trouble. Or I'm not talking about having car troubles. I'm not talking about, your football team abandoned your city and went to a different city. I don't know. Not talking about those too soon? Okay. Talking about all these different troubles that we face. But Jesus is talking about the kind of troubles that reduces everything you spent your time and energy on focusing on into a pile of ashes. The type of troubles that leave you with more questions than you have answers. The type of trouble that causes you to question everything that you ever believed in. The kind of trouble that doesn't allow you to summarize your faith into a cute little phrase that fits on a bumper sticker. Jesus said, "In this world you will have trouble." Nobody is exempt from that, right? If I went around the room and we passed some microphone around, everybody would have some story of loss. Everyone has a story of loss. And I'm not just talking about death. Death, of course, is a part of loss. It's a part of reality. It's a part of what we face. But I'm also talking about the losses of a job or a career, maybe. I'm talking about the loss of a friendship. That's painful to lose a friendship. I'm talking about the loss of a family member as far as like the closeness that you had with them. Maybe that's been drifting apart. Maybe you no longer have that close relationship that you once had with somebody who's in your family. I'm talking about the loss of health. You or maybe someone you know isn't able to do something that they were once able to do before because of some health complications. That's a loss. The loss of a marriage, the loss of a dream. Different dreams that we have in life, we sometimes lose out on those. Maybe you talk to other people about their childhoods and you're like, I can't relate to that childhood. That doesn't sound like mine. Mine wasn't full of this type of love and nurturing that you're speaking of, and you have a loss of a childhood. You missed out on a childhood. For some, it's a loss of innocence. Maybe something happened to you that shouldn't have happened to you. Something happened to you that was unfair, and it shouldn't have happened. The loss of opportunities. We've gone through this season now, over the last couple years where people have lost, they've missed out on graduation ceremonies, birthday parties, loss of family vacation maybe we're planning for. That's a loss. That's something that we need to face. Is that something that we've missed out on? Everybody has a story of loss. We face it as a reality here as a church. When I got into ministry and I got into being a pastor, one of the things that I didn't think about is actually like a pretty regular part of my life is helping host memorial services for people. I mean, that's because I don't think things through very much. Of course, it makes so much sense. We do a lot of memorial services here. I help out a lot in sort of the behind the scenes of it. And I've been able to watch Pastor Ken walk so many people through this season of loss, and it really is powerful. I'm including a couple months ago, a man who pastored this church for decades, Dr. Claire Berry. He passed away, and we hosted his memorial service here. Loss is inevitable. We all have stories of loss. So let's just call that out as we start off today. Regardless of what losses you and I have experienced in our life, one thing that's important is that it's essential that we grieve those losses. It's essential that we grieve those losses. To grieve something means we're not going to ignore it. It means we're going to acknowledge that we've lost something significant or meaningful in our life. When Jesus lost his good friend Lazarus, his response is summarized into just 3 words. Then Jesus wept. He mourned. He was sad. He was heartbroken, distraught, and he grieved. Grief is natural. It's predictable. And it's an unavoidable response to loss. Now, most people equate grief with sadness, but we see grief creep up in all different types of ways, not just in sadness. We can see grief come out as anger, right? We can see grief come out as fear or guilt or resentment or even anxiety. You feel anxious about things. You're uncertain about things because of something that you lost. In the Bible, we read about a man named Job. Job was a good, godly man who experienced an avalanche of loss in his life. Financial loss, the loss of his health, the loss of family members to death. In the midst of those losses, he articulates the anguish he is feeling in Job 6:2-3. It says, if my misery could be weighed and my troubles be put on the scales, they would outweigh all of the sands of the sea. Such a poetic reflection that Job is having. He's saying, I'm overwhelmed. This is too much for me to carry on my own. King David of Israel, after experiencing a series of losses in his life, started to feel resentful towards God. So he prays that God, and he cries this out in Psalm 13. O Lord, how long will you forget me? Forever? How long will you look the other way? How long must I struggle with anguish in my soul and with sorrow in my heart every day? So here's a straightforward question that we all need to address. Have you ever been disappointed by God? That can feel like a risky thing to ask, right? You don't want to say I was disappointed by God. But have you ever felt like God has let you down? When we experience a loss of a dream or loss of security or loss of business, a loss of something meaningful, in those moments, we might feel like God is indifferent towards us or that he doesn't care, that he's looking the other way. And it's essential This is why it's essential that we grieve those losses. It puts us face to face to dealing with those losses and not making us feel indifferent or angry in those different types of ways. There's an entire book in the Bible called Lamentations. It's a book filled with writings that express the humiliation, despair of the Jewish people felt over the destruction of the city of Jerusalem. But the temptation for all of us when we feel hurt, pain, sadness, resentment, or whatever emotions we're feeling, the temptation is to find ways to make whatever we're feeling go away and ignore reality. Right? We want to escape the reality of the world, right? You ever have that? You ever had that where you're faced with, I know how I need to address this, but I just don't want to acknowledge it. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to feel that. I think we learn this. We pick up this skill at a pretty young age, actually. I saw this thing on Twitter. This was a post from a dad who was having an interaction with his kid, and so he posted this statement. Tracy, I think we got that back there. He said, my 3-year-old son asked how long he had to wait until he could stop listening to me. This is funny. I told him he had to listen to me for the rest of his life. He looked at me dead in the eyes and said, I'll listen to you for the rest of your life. Toddlers are cold-blooded, man. But that's how it can feel, right? We're faced with distress, things we don't want to acknowledge, things we don't want to embrace. And what we want to do is we want to retreat, right? We want to medicate our losses to numb the pain. We want to minimize our losses by telling ourselves that they don't really matter. That's fine. It's not a big deal. Don't make it a bigger thing than it is, right? We escape our losses, but here's the deal. When we medicate our losses or minimize them or find ways to escape them, they don't really go away. When we fail to really grieve our losses, what happens is we end up burying our emotions alive, which means at some point those emotions are going to show up again. And when they do, more often than not, they will show up with more power and have greater consequences. People thought, industrialists 50 years ago thought, toxic waste. What we're going to do is we're just going to bury it under the ground, and eventually it'll go away. Eventually, if we just bury all this toxic waste under the ground, it'll just kind of disappear and it'll take care of itself. But what we've learned over decades now is that that's not true. That toxic waste is now polluting water. It's now hurting crops. It is hurting livestock. It is wreaking havoc on nature because we didn't actually deal with the problem. And the same thing happens to us. When we don't face our losses, when we don't grieve them, then we're not going to respond in an appropriate way. So what happens is, when we bury our emotions alive and haven't fully grieved a specific loss, our response to something are disproportionate to what happened, right? That happens to us a lot. Where if I don't face my loss, if I don't grieve that, it's going to come out in other ways with the people I love the most. That's going to come out with my relationship with my wife. If I don't deal with that loss, if I don't grieve that, then I'm going to start to get upset or angry or irritable about things that don't really deserve that level of a response. So I need to face those fears, face those losses, rather, so that we can make sure to healthily process that, especially for those that we love, to be able to have a relationship with us. Suppressing or ignoring our emotions doesn't make them go away. Eventually, those emotions grow into anger, resentment, indifference, irritability, or detachment from others, right? We withdraw. And not paying attention to our emotions has consequences. As a matter of fact, we all need to know this. Everyone around us will eventually feel what we fail to grieve. Everyone around us will eventually feel what we fail to grieve. Your future as a great employee, in your company. Your future to be a great friend to those people who you want to have that close relationship with. Your future as a great husband or a great wife. Your future as a great son or daughter is contingent upon your ability to deal with your emotions in a healthy way. Emotions are messengers, and they are meant to alert us of something, and so we have to pay attention to them. So that being said, everyone grieves differently. Everybody grieves differently. No two people are going to grieve the same way. You'll often find that probably with the people that you're closest to. Again, everyone's going to grieve somewhat different. Some people grieve inwardly. They look inside. Others are very expressive with their grieving. They're very outspoken with what they're processing. Some people talk a lot about their loss with others, with other people out there, and some discuss their loss with just a few specific trusted people. Some people grieve the loss of what was, others grieve the loss of what could have been. Everyone processes and grieves differently. It's easy to get lost in projects, you kind of like put your everything into something that will keep your mind busy, to distract ourselves, or try to rationalize why something happened. Everyone grieves differently, and that's okay. No one has to grieve exactly the same. What's important is that we actually grieve our losses, and we do so in a healthy way. So let's talk about that. Now that I've kind of set us up for this idea, this concept of we need to grieve our losses, my hope is that if you have an ungrieved loss in your life, that at least one of these ways that I'll throw out here to you will help you grieve in a healthy way. The first one is to pay attention to the losses in our life. Pay attention to the losses in our life. Most of the time, because we're so busy and we've got so much going on in our lives, we often overlook the real losses in our life. If you've ever gone through the loss of a job, I've done that before. Lost a job, and if you really rationalize it and think about it, there's other jobs out there. You can go get another job, but there's a real loss. The real loss that you're experiencing isn't losing of that job. It's probably more the embarrassment or the loss of security that provided, or maybe there was a certain status that you received through that job, and now losing that means that you've lost that status. Our fear of what our future is going to look like. It's important to really think through, process, what is it that I need to grieve? What did I really lose here? Because you can get another job, but what was the loss? If you've gone through the loss of a friendship, the real loss might actually be the loss of other friends that you lost through that friendship, right? Sometimes if you end up not being friends with somebody anymore, that means you might be saying goodbye to a whole group of people. And there may have been a betrayal of trust. You may no longer be able to feel like you can trust others. And that makes it difficult moving forward for you to make new friendships and for you to make new relationships. If I can't identify a loss, it will eventually own me, right? And so it's important to identify what is that we really lost. Something else we need to remember if we want to grieve in a healthy way, it's important that we do this, is don't try to make sense of a loss. Don't try to make sense of a loss. Most of us, when we experience loss, we try to connect the dots. We try to make sense of a tragedy, right? We reflect back on it. We think, why did that happen? Why did that happen that way? Is there anything I could have done differently? Or what was the specific reasons for how that happened? And, you think about someone who has a very sharp mind and a quick wit, and they're diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Is anything ever going to make sense? Is anything ever going to make sense of why that would happen? I have a friend of mine who, him and his wife are much older than my wife and I, and a few months ago, his wife had a stroke. She had a stroke. She was young. She was healthy and happy. It didn't make any sense. Didn't make any sense why she had this stroke. And so she was in the hospital, and over a period of time, she looked like she was making massive strides, like a radical recovery. And we were rooting for her, and we were so excited for her. And then one day, just out of the blue, the news came through that she didn't make it. She had been in the hospital for months, and just for whatever reason, that was the news. And so, eventually, I did get the medical, scientific answer of what happened. And the truth is knowing that didn't make the pain go away for anybody. Having that understanding doesn't solve that pain. It doesn't help us actually deal with that. So when we try to make sense of why tragedy happens, why bad things happen, why loss can happen. Sometimes that can lead us into a dark place, and that's not really us dealing with our emotions. If we can explain it scientifically, it doesn't take away the pain. In fact, Job, who I alluded to earlier, when he experienced an avalanche of loss in his life, he had friends that came to his side that also tried to help him make sense of what was going on theologically, like biblically, like why that would happen. They were trying to give him a practical perspective. And Job did the same thing. He kept insisting he didn't do anything wrong. He didn't make sense that he was going through what he was going through. So eventually he comes to this conclusion. This is Job 9:32. God is not a mortal like me, so I cannot argue with him or take him to trial. So a little while later, he unleashes his feelings towards God. He looks to God and he says declaratively in Job 13, "Tell me what I've done wrong. Show me my rebellion and my sin. Why do you turn away from me? Why do you treat me as your enemy?" Most of the time, the losses in our life aren't going to make any sense. In other words, we're not going to be able to point to logic and reasons that why we're enduring the pain we're enduring. So what tends to happen in those moments is we come up with trite little phrases. And I'm going to pull up this post that I saw that talks about this. It was from this woman named Dr. Caroline Leaf. She's a scientist. She's a neurologist with a specific focus on mental health and mental illness. And what she's trying to help us do here with this post, it's a two-part post. So I'll start with this part. And the first part is kind of what has become a common way to respond to someone who is grieving. And it sort of falls under the lines of us trying to make sense of something. So here's her advice on what not to say to somebody who is grieving. Okay, 1, at least he's in a better place. His suffering is over. You'll be okay after a while. Just give it time. I understand how you feel. Maybe you've been through something similar and you want them to know that. You shouldn't feel that way. I'm guilty of saying that to people when they're grieving. There is a reason for everything. God's in charge. Now that's true, by the way. That doesn't mean that that's not true, but maybe it's the timing of someone who's grieving and trying to help them see, not to make sense of it, but to just be there for them. But saying that to them sometimes isn't helpful. So-and-so was such a good person. God wanted them to be with him, wanted them to be in heaven with them. You have to be strong for your spouse, your children, your mother, etc. Stay busy. Don't think about it. Or just give it time. Time heals. Now, what she suggests, Tracy, let's move on to the next one. Those are trite phrases that are kind of having us try to help people make sense of things. But instead, what's more powerful is for us to just let people know that we're there for them. So one idea is to say, I'm sorry. I don't have words, but I'm here for you in whatever you need. I don't know what to say, but I love you, and I'm here for you and with you. Or just, what do you need in this moment? How can I help you? How can I help you? What do you need? Do you want me to share some of my favorite memories about the person you lost? Would that make you feel better if I did that? Would that help you process? I'm available for grocery deliveries, kid pickups, babysitting, making dinners, whatever you need. I'm here for you. Consider me a resource. And then finally, please know that however you're feeling right now, sad, numb, guilty, tired, angry, it's normal. There's no way to feel, I love you and I'm so sad that you're going through this. Loss almost never makes sense. And if we're going to grieve in a healthy way, we need to embrace that. And if we want to really be there for people as they are processing these things, it's much, much more helpful for us to let them know that we love them and we're there for them than to try to throw these phrases, these one-liners at them that really, honestly, just make us feel better probably than make them feel better. Moving on, Another thing we want to do to grieve in a healthy way is ensure that we don't rush the grieving process. This is an important one. We don't want to rush the grieving process. Experts say that it takes anywhere from 18 to 24 months for someone to start the process of grieving a significant loss. That's just to start the process. So if you think of a significant loss, that could look something like losing a spouse. Losing a spouse might take you 2 years before you're even able to start the process. So you think about that timeline and you go, the memorial, the funeral, whatever type of service you have, that happens pretty early on in the process, right? And for most people who go through that, that happens and it's a blur. If you were there, they often don't remember that you were there or who was there, but maybe they do, and they were grateful for you. They were grateful and maybe encouraged by that, but it's such a blur, it just blows on by. It's really ends up for most people just being a time to stay busy and focus on something. When the reality starts to set in, though, is when, it's time to call Social Security. It's time to follow up on any sort of life insurance or find out that there was no life insurance, or it is calling a utility company to have someone's name taken off of a bill. It's going through someone's belongings, their old clothes, their stuff, their photos after they're gone, and going through those things when it really starts to set in for that person, and then they're able to start the grieving process. Grief is like a fog. Sometimes the fog is so thick you can't see your hand in front of your face. People want to look at grief like it's graduating elementary school, right? There was a season, I did that, and then I got through it, and now I am over it. But grief doesn't work that way. It's not, you don't go through a period of time where you're sad, and then you're angry, and then you're in denial, and then you're confused, and then you're better. It simply doesn't work that way. You experience all of those emotions simultaneously, and that's okay. So it's important to not rush through the grieving process. We don't want to rush through that because it's important that we take the time to really process it, because, if you have a significant loss, someone who's experienced a significant loss, it isn't something that you really get over. It's something that you kind of end up carrying with you. But you can face it, you can grieve it, you can process it, and then you can see the God story through all of it. And that's going to bring me to my last fill-in here, and I'm going to invite the band to come up. They're going to lead us in a song here in a little bit. But the last fill-in is never lose hope. It's important that we never lose hope. Yes, we will face different troubles in this world. We're warned of that from Jesus, but that's not the end of that statement. You see, through the story of Jesus, what we see is the death, burial, and resurrection. He can take all different types of things and make good out of them. Right? We sang that earlier in the song earlier today. You take what the enemy meant for evil and you used it for good. It's a truth that we can rely on. And as he has that warning that you'll face troubles, he continues on and say this: in this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. So even through our troubles and through the different things that we face, Jesus has overcome it. Jesus has promises for us that are bigger than our losses. And he can take our losses and turn them into something beautiful. He wants to make something meaningful from the things that we throw away. He wants to take the ashes of our life and make something beautiful from them. For many years, I lived in Las Vegas. And while I was there, I was working with students, middle school students, and I met this business owner, a guy named Drew. And Drew owned this company where he would do printing on like different construction clothing, if that makes sense. So he would print, like if you've seen like construction workers are wearing like vests, like the orange vests, he would print like the company logo on them. That was kind of his business and his company. By the time I met Drew, a few years earlier, his son, as a young boy, died in a tragic accident. And as you can imagine, he was devastated. It was his son, and he was so young, gone way too soon. And, he was distraught, and he was sad, and he grieved it, though. And he processed it, and over time, as God started to heal him and heal his heart, he had made a decision that he wanted to start a foundation for his son. And he said his son was the kindest boy he had ever known. And all he ever wanted to do was spread kindness to his school, to kids on his baseball team. That's all he wanted to do. So Drew's looking around and he goes, well, I have this printing business. I already have the ability to print stuff. I'm going to print t-shirts. And I'm going to print these shirts that just simply say, be kind. Be kind. And I got to tell you, by the time I met him, he had been doing work with the public school system and with the Little League teams. And everywhere you would go around town, every school, every baseball team, everywhere, these kids were wearing these shirts that said, be kind, to share the life and legacy of this guy's son. Schools would have Be Kind days where all of the kids would wear their Be Kind shirts, and they'd have a big rally, and Drew would come and he'd speak at it, and it was really powerful to see this man who had processed this and wanted to share something good through something that was so painful for him at a point. Our story of grief has the potential to become a story of unresolved anger, of hatred, bitterness, hurt, or it has the potential to become a story of hope, healing, and resurrection. In this world we'll have troubles, but take heart. Jesus has overcome this world, and in him, whatever dies has the hope of being resurrected into something new. So today, I'm going to pray, invite us to reflect as we sing one last song together. So would you stand with me? Let's all stand together. I'll pray for us. And after I pray, we'll sing this song. We started singing it a couple weeks ago, and it really is an invitation type of a song to invite God to do in us what only he can do, to rest on us, to have his Spirit transform us. And maybe that's where you're at today. Maybe you're saying, I do have some unresolved loss, and maybe I can't process it all during this one song, but maybe this could be a sparking moment for you where God starts to do a work in you that would carry on from beyond this room. Pray with me, and then let's sing together. God, we just thank you for being a God of hope. And we know that there are different things that we face in this world that only you can help us with. We want to face those things today. We want to look to you today. We want to process that today. We pray that you would be moving in our lives. We love you, Lord. Amen. Let's sing. You can follow along with the words on the screen.